When God becomes your everything again, these changes begin. There are seasons when God was once at the center of everything you did. Your thoughts, your prayers, your decisions. And then, slowly, without a dramatic moment, something shifted. Life became louder, responsibilities multiplied. Disappointments piled up. Survival took priority over intimacy. You didn't stop believing in God, but somewhere along the way, He stopped being your everything. And yet here you are now, sensing something stirring again in your spirit. Not guilt, not pressure, but a quiet return. This return doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a holy restlessness. A sense that the things you leaned on are no longer enough. That the distractions that once numbed you no longer satisfy you. That the noise you filled your days with feels empty when you're alone. And in that quiet, God begins to matter again. Not as an accessory to your life, but as its foundation. When God becomes your everything again, it's rarely because life suddenly gets easier. Often, it's because life stripped away what couldn't hold you. You tried control, you tried strength, you tried distraction, and now your heart is remembering where it truly belongs. This is not regression, this is restoration. God is not disappointed in you. He is welcoming you back into closeness. This process is gentle, but it is profound. God doesn't force His way back into first place. He waits, He invites, He stirs hunger, rather than shame. And as He becomes your everything again, you start noticing changes that feel subtle but unmistakable. Your desires begin to shift. Your priorities realign. Your inner life grows louder than the chaos around you. You may not even have the words for it yet, but something is happening. Prayer feels different. Silence feels necessary. Obedience feels more important than convenience. You're no longer satisfied with a surface-level faith. You want God Himself, not just relief, not just answers, not just blessings. If you feel this pull, this return, this quiet rebuilding of intimacy, this message is for you. Because when God becomes your everything again, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens through signs, gentle, personal, deeply meaningful signs that reveal your heart is coming home. Number 1, you feel a renewed hunger for God, not just His help. One of the clearest signs that God is becoming your everything again is a shift in what your heart is craving. You still need His help, of course, but something deeper is happening. You don't just want answers anymore. You want Him. You want His presence, His closeness, His voice. Prayer stops being a list of needs and starts becoming a place of connection again. This hunger feels different from desperation. It's quieter, more intentional. You're not running to God only when things fall apart. You're turning toward Him because being away from Him feels empty. You begin to miss Him in the middle of your day. Silence starts to feel sacred. Scripture no longer feels like an obligation. It feels like nourishment you didn't realize you were missing. When God becomes your everything again, your prayers slow down. You linger. You're not rushing God anymore. You're learning how to sit with Him. Sometimes you don't even know what to say, and that's okay. You're discovering that closeness doesn't require perfect words, just an open heart. This hunger is a gift. It's God drawing you back without force or shame. He's reminding your soul of what it was created for. The world can keep you busy, distracted, even successful, but it cannot satisfy this kind of hunger. Only God can. If you've noticed that your heart feels restless without Him, that you're no longer content with a distant or rushed relationship, take it as a sign of restoration. God is not becoming important to you again. He is becoming essential. And when hunger for God returns, it means your heart is remembering where true life flows from. Number 2, the things that once distracted you begin to lose their hold. Another sign that God is becoming your everything again is that the things that once consumed you begin to loosen their grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, unmistakably. Distractions that once filled your time and numbed your thoughts no longer satisfy you the way they used to. You may still engage with them, but they don't define you anymore. You don't escape into them the same way. What once felt comforting now feels shallow. What once helped you cope now feels like noise. This isn't boredom. It's discernment. Your spirit is growing sensitive again. God doesn't rip distractions away harshly. He gently reorders affection. He makes room in your heart by reducing the power of what no longer belongs at the center. You begin to notice conviction where you once felt comfortable, not condemnation, but an awareness that certain habits, environments, or dependencies are crowding out intimacy with God. This shift can feel uncomfortable because distractions often served a purpose during survival seasons. They helped you get through pain, disappointment, or loneliness. But now God is calling you deeper, and what once helped you survive cannot help you grow. As distractions fade, you may feel exposed at first, quieter, more aware of your inner world, but that space is intentional. God is reclaiming territory in your heart. He is not taking things away to leave you empty. He is making space to fill you with Himself. If you're noticing that noise feels exhausting, that constant stimulation no longer brings peace, and that you're craving simplicity and depth again, recognize what's happening. God is gently becoming your everything again, and as distractions lose their hold, intimacy with Him begins to take its place. Number 3. You become more sensitive to God's presence in His absence. When God becomes your everything again, your spiritual sensitivity returns. You begin to notice when you are close to Him and when you are drifting. His presence becomes something your soul recognizes, not just something you believe in. You don't need a dramatic moment to know when you've moved away. Your heart feels it immediately. There was a time when distance from God didn't bother you much. You stayed busy, you stayed distracted, you stayed numb. But now something has changed. When prayer becomes rushed, when scripture is neglected, when obedience is delayed, you feel an inner unease. Not condemnation, but longing. Your spirit knows something is missing. God's presence begins to feel like home again. Peace settles when you turn toward Him. Rest returns when you sit quietly with Him. And when life pulls you away, your heart doesn't adjust as easily anymore. You miss Him. You notice the dryness. You feel the difference between existing and abiding. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is intimacy. The closer you are to God, the more aware you become of His nearness. Just as distance feels heavier in close relationships, spiritual distance becomes noticeable when love is restored. God is retraining your heart to recognize Him again. You also begin to sense God's presence in everyday moments, in stillness, in conviction, in peace that doesn't match circumstances, in moments when you feel gently redirected or comforted without explanation. His presence becomes personal again, not abstract. If you've noticed that spiritual dryness no longer feels tolerable, that you're uncomfortable staying distant from God, this is not regression. It is renewal. God is awakening your awareness. He is teaching your heart to recognize His presence and refuse to settle for less. That sensitivity is a sign that God is becoming your everything again. Number 4. Obedience starts to matter more than convenience. One of the most undeniable signs that God is becoming your everything again is a shift in how you make decisions. Obedience begins to matter more than ease. You start asking not just what feels good or what works, but what honors God. And sometimes that question costs you comfort. In seasons when God is distant, obedience feels optional. You justify compromise. You delay obedience until it's convenience. But when God becomes central again, Obedience becomes personal. You don't obey out of fear. You obey out of love. You care about God's heart. You don't want to grieve him. This doesn't mean obedience becomes easy. It often becomes harder, because now you are aware. You can't ignore conviction. You can't pretend you don't hear his voice. And while obedience may cost you approval, comfort, or control, it brings peace that convenience never could. You begin to say no where you once said yes. You walk away from things that don't align in God's truth. You choose faithfulness, even when no one else understands. Not because you are trying to be spiritual, but because your heart belongs to God again. This kind of obedience is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It happens in decisions. No one applauds, but God sees it. And obedience deepens intimacy. Every time you choose God over convenience, trust over control, faith over fear, your relationship with him grows stronger. If you've noticed that compromise bothers you more than it used to, that disobedience no longer feels small, and that honoring God feels worth the cost, take it as a sign. God is reclaiming first place in your heart. And when obedience becomes an expression of love rather than obligation, it means God is becoming your everything again. Number 5. You begin trusting God with what you tried to control. When God becomes your everything again, one of the most noticeable changes is what happens to your grip. You stop holding so tightly to outcomes, timelines, and people. Not because you stop caring, but because you start trusting. Control slowly gives way to surrender, and anxiety loses its authority over your heart. This doesn't happen overnight. At first, you may still reach for control instinctively. But now, when you do, something inside you resists. You feel the tension between managing everything yourself and resting in God's faithfulness. And increasingly, you choose to release instead of tighten. You begin trusting God with areas you once guarded fiercely. Your future, your finances, your relationships, your healing, your unanswered prayers. You stop demanding certainty before obedience. You learn to say, I don't understand this, but I trust you. And in that surrender, peace begins to grow where fear once ruled. Trusting God doesn't mean you stop planning or caring. It means you stop believing everything depends on you. You no longer carry the weight of outcomes alone. You bring decisions to God and wait. You listen. You allow him to lead instead of rushing ahead. This kind of trust changes how you respond to uncertainty. When things don't go your way, you don't immediately panic. You pause. You pray. You remember that God has carried you before, and slowly the need to control everything fades, because you realize God is faithful even when you're not in charge. If you've noticed that you're more willing to wait, more willing to let go, and less consumed by what might go wrong, this is a sign of restoration. God is becoming your everything again. And when God holds the things you once controlled, your heart finally learns how to rest. Number 6, your inner life becomes louder than external validation. Another powerful sign that God is becoming your everything again is the shift from external validation to internal alignment. What others think begins to matter less than what God is saying. You're no longer driven by approval, applause, or affirmation the way you once were. Instead, you're learning to live from the inside out. This doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop needing them to define you. You no longer measure your worth by how visible, successful, or affirmed you are. God's voice becomes louder than the noise of opinions, expectations, and comparison. You start noticing this shift in small ways. You're less reactive to criticism. You're not as shaken by being overlooked. You don't feel the same urgency to explain yourself or prove your value. Your confidence becomes quieter, steadier, and rooted in God rather than recognition. As your inner life grows, silence becomes meaningful. You reflect more. You pray more honestly. You listen more closely. God begins shaping your decisions from within, not through pressure from outside. You stop asking, how will this look? And start asking, does this honor God? This inward grounding is not isolation. It is maturity. God is teaching you to stand secure, even when affirmation is absent. And in that security, you find freedom. You're no longer pulled in every direction by opinions. You're anchored. If you've noticed that God's approval feels more important than public recognition, that peace matters more than praise, and that your identity feels settled rather than fragile, this is not accidental. God is reclaiming first place. When your inner life becomes louder than external validation, it's a sign that God is becoming your everything again. Number 7. You start finding joy and security in God alone. One of the most beautiful signs that God is becoming your everything again is that joy begins to rise from a deeper place, not from circumstances lining up, not from prayers being answered quickly, not from life finally feeling stable, but from God Himself. You begin to realize that even when things are uncertain, your soul is steady. Even when questions remain, your heart is at peace. This kind of joy is quiet but strong. It doesn't need constant stimulation. It doesn't disappear when plans change. It doesn't depend on people showing up perfectly or outcomes turning out the way you hoped. It is rooted in the unchanging nature of God. You discover that He is enough, even when He is all you have. Security follows this joy. You stop living with the constant fear of losing what makes you feel okay. You're no longer anchored to things that can be taken away. Your confidence doesn't rise and fall with success or approval. You begin to feel held, covered, and sustained by God alone. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. There are still challenges, still unanswered prayers, still moments of grief and uncertainty. But now, those things don't undo you. You found something deeper. You found God as your anchor, not just your helper. Worship becomes more sincere. Gratitude grows even in lack. You find yourself thanking God not just for what He gives, but for who He is. And when joy flows from that place, it is resilient. It remains when emotions fluctuate. It stays when circumstances shift. If you've noticed that your peace no longer depends on everything going right, that your joy doesn't vanish when life feels heavy, and that God Himself feels like your safe place again, this is a powerful sign. God is not just part of your life. He is becoming your everything again. And when God becomes your everything, you discover that you were never meant to build your life on anything less. Conclusion. When God becomes your everything again, it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels right. It feels like returning home after a long journey. Your heart settles. Your striving softens. Your faith deepens. This restoration doesn't happen because you suddenly became stronger or more disciplined. It happens because God lovingly drew you back. Every sign you've recognized points to the same truth. Your heart is recentering on God. He is no longer just one priority among many. He is becoming the foundation again, and from that foundation everything else begins to find its proper place. God never shames you for seasons of distance. He welcomes you back with grace. He rebuilds intimacy gently. He restores hunger, trust, obedience, and joy without pressure. This is not about perfection. It's about direction. Your heart is turning toward Him again, and that is enough. If you're in this season, honor it, protect it, create space for God. Let Him be your first thought again, your refuge again, your joy again. Life will still have challenges, but you won't face them alone or unanchored. Take a moment to reflect on what God is restoring in you right now. Pray honestly. Sit quietly. Let Him continue the work He has already begun. And if this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who may be sensing the same return. God becoming your everything again is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a deeper one. And the God who called you back is faithful to keep you close.